It is House of Strauss. We are joined by the one, the only Chris Broussard, a man with many jobs, but most prominently on your TV sets, co-host of First Things First, one of the best chemistry, to invent a word, shows on all of television. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm great, Ethan. It's good to finally get on with you. We've been trying for seems like years, so it's good to be on.
It's great to finally connect. You know, it's weird, Chris. Speaking of which, I have this sense sometimes when I'm watching your show, because I am a fan, where I go, hey, we were at ESPN around the same time. I wish I knew this guy. I like this guy. He's got this openness and this thoughtfulness that I don't think people commonly associate with sports debate shows. I think there are a lot of people, frankly, a lot of my subscribers who might make assumptions about what goes on such a show in the middle of the day. And I think, man, this guy would have been a great guy to know. But it's fun to discover who you are in a respect, because I do genuinely think on that show, that's you. Am I right that is an expression of who you are in a TV setting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the kind words. But, you know, at ESPN, I was mainly a reporter. I did do some shows like First Take with Skip Bayless before they settled on Stephen A. I did Outside the Lines. I did some shows where your personality could really come forth. But for the most part, I was doing Sports Center and things like that, where I was just reporting news. And so I think a show like First Things First just allows my personality to come out more, which is really why I went to FS1, was because they wanted me as a personality and a commentator versus just a reporter.
Did you ever feel pressure to have a hot take, or did producers tell you back in the day to have one? Because I view you, and people listening might not know, as somebody who has often a take that might be in between, or a yes, but kind of take on the situation. Obviously, Nick Wright runs a little bit hotter sometimes. Do you feel like, I'm trying to find the right words for it, but that at a certain point you came to understand that you could be reasonable on television and that was okay as a performance, or was that the approach from day one?
Well, that was my approach from day one, but I think that my background as a reporter really contributed to that, because I always felt like as a reporter, I have to be objective. So when I was doing the debate shows, or at ESPN, and even it just at ESPN, I always was like, I'm a reporter too. And I was at that time. So I'm still talking to people around the league and reporting news and things like that. So I just was like, I always have to be objective and speak what I think is the truth, and not just throw out hot takes for the heck of it. And then as I got to FS1, that was just kind of my style. And that's who I am anyway. Like and even as a reporter, and you know that sometimes some crazy stuff happens with reporters, I never would write something about someone that wasn't true, or at least that I never would do that purposely to try to either get them to start giving me information, or because I was mad about them not giving me information. Like, I would never do that. And vice versa. I would never write something favorable about someone that wasn't true just because they were maybe a source of mine or a friend, or, I developed a relationship with them. And so that's something that just kind of carried over to me now that I do more commentary and takes and things like that.
I think what helps your credibility there, Chris, too, not that you need help with the credibility, is that, to my knowledge, you are represented by Klutch, and yet you are still openly a Michael Jordan is the GOAT guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't seen LeBron in a while, but early in his career, we had a really good relationship, and I would think we still do, even though I haven't seen him or really talked to him. But I did probably 6 cover stories for ESPN, the magazine, on LeBron. And as you know, when you do magazine stories, you really spend some time with the guy and get to know him to some degree. And we had a really good relationship. But again, I was still like, I don't work for LeBron. If I think Michael Jordan's better, then I'm going to say Michael Jordan's better. And like you said, now I am represented by Klutch with UTA. And I talk with Rich Paul a good amount. And Rich, Rich, of course, is always pushing the LeBron narrative. But, I think when you speak your mind, people respect you. And I think that's what you have to do. And to be honest, also, as you know, I'm a man of faith, and I just try to treat people. I just got to be fair with people. I cannot go on TV or radio and just rip somebody for the heck of it. If I don't think it's fair. Obviously, there's a time to be critical of people, but I can't do it for sport. I can't do it for entertainment. It has to be something I really feel or believe is the right thing to do. It's just about my ethics, I guess.
What was the decision like for you? Because we've never had that conversation. I'm curious because I have this recollection that you were far out ahead of that, reporting that LeBron was going to Miami. And from my recollection, there was just so much pressure on that and what it was going to be. And I think, were you part? This is poor research done by me. You might have even been part of the decision special. Do I have that right? Yes.
I was not part of their special, but as you know, like you said, I was doing around the clock reporting on that. Yeah. And so that was a great time, to be honest. I think back with fondness to that time. So it was 2010, of course. And as you know, that was the story of the decade, or even the century at that point, because it was early in the 2000s. And since then, almost every summer has had, big time free agents that everybody followed. But at that point, it wasn't a first, but the magnitude of it had not been seen before. And so my thinking was, man, this is really a chance to separate myself. And so I was working around the clock for those 3 weeks or so. I was just working around the clock. And it even got to the point where ESPN, because I was getting good information, was having me on almost all day. Like I would go in, there were many days where I would go in to be on Mike and Mike in the morning in the 6 o'clock a.m. hour. And I would be at the studio in Bristol until like midnight. Because they will want me on the evening Sports Center and then the afternoon Sports Center and ESPN News and all of that. And so that really did help my career as well, because I was getting a lot of news. And then they put me on the NBA Countdown show with Magic Johnson, John Barry, and Michael Wilbon. And that was big. We were out in L.A. So that did help my career a lot. Now, the interesting thing is once I did, well covering that story, I felt like it wasn't spoken, but I felt like ESPN started looking at me like, oh, this guy's going to be our Adam Schefter of the NBA. And I never wanted to be that. I worked around the clock for those 3 weeks, but I didn't want to work around the clock for 350 days a year. Yeah. Real talk. And so they kind of viewed me in that role. I never said anything like, hey, I don't want to do that. So I just kind of let it flow. And then, they started looking at me to break all these stories. And I really wasn't I was working and I was putting in my work, but I wasn't working like a Woj or a Shams around the clock all day, every day. And I wasn't breaking news like they were.
Yeah. That lifestyle is impossible. Oh. And I remember what the ESPN news desk was like, Chris, and I wasn't even a newsbreaker, but if there was some news from a practice with the Warriors, they were angry at me that I didn't do what they wanted to do.
Right.
And it's a pressure. I mean, there's a Washington Post article from about 2 years ago on Schefter and how he lives his life. And yeah, he gets paid $9 million a year, but I came away from it going, that is not worth it. That's not worth it. People might think it's worth it. I mean, there are probably people listening who have a job that they absolutely hate who go, yeah, I would want to be on TV and famous and breaking stories. But when you actually read about Schefter's life, that's a mental prison, man. He is in a state of forever vigilance and fear and consumption. And it's just one of these things where I kind of wonder two things. One, why do we need this much? And number two, it's just, the second thing is just, I'm not sure. How do you feel about the elevation of the newsbreaker to this degree where it just bleeds out somebody when they're, when they're that big time with it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like you said, I agree that I just didn't want that lifestyle. I got two daughters. I'm married, and I really wanted to have, of course, work and work hard, but have family time as well. I remember after that summer of 2010, after the decision and all that, I went on vacation with my family, my daughters and my wife, and we were at amusement parks and just, out having a good time. And I always had been in touch with guys around the league, but now a lot of people were calling me and giving me information or wanting to give me information. And I was like, I'm on vacation. I'm not trying to break a story necessarily right now, and it's hard to say that because these are sources and you don't want to tell them don't call or, you know what I mean? You kind of need to break the news as they're giving it to you. But I was just like, I'm not trying to do this. My life is about more than just being a sports writer, and my family comes before my career. They're intertwined, obviously. But so to your question about the newsbreaker now, it really shifted with Twitter. And I give Woj and Schefter a lot of credit for how they capitalized on it. I used to feel like when you broke a story, you had to have the substance of it, the why, the what happened, why was this decision made, so on and so forth. And then with Twitter, it just became the transactional. Like this is the transaction that's happening. And you know how it is, Ethan. It really, who got it first was dependent. A lot of this comes from agents. And an agent might text you first, and then 30 seconds later, text the next guy, and then the next guy. And it's really whoever gets it out first. I mean, you have that advantage if you were the first one. I miss stories. There were times where I might have fallen asleep and it's 2 a.m. I remember one time specifically, it was a big story about a coaching hire, and I had kind of been out in front of it and working with it, getting the info from this agent. He texted me first, but I was asleep, and I got a text at like 2:30 in the morning. I woke up around 3:30 and saw the news broke, and I checked to see if the agent had hit me, and he had before it broke, but I was asleep and didn't end up breaking the story. And so it's just, like you said, now it's just a lot of transactions. And one thing you do see is sometimes you can see, like, again, I did not want to, you have to develop relationships and trust with people that could become sources. But again, I also always felt like I do need to remain objective. And I can't just do somebody's bidding to get certain stories, and so that could hurt you in this type of news breaking business or an atmosphere the way it is now.
It
so I'm glad to be out of it. Believe me.
Oh, dude, I think I don't know if it's that you made the right decision or you just had the right values, but it led you to a better place to be on TV, which is funny because for a lot of people, television can be mentally deranging in of itself. A lot of people psychologically can't handle television. I get the sense with you and Nick and Wilds that for whatever reason, you guys can do it in a way that's healthy. But I think that speaks in a way to how horrible being a top newsbreaker is, that it's better to be on TV. It's more psychologically healthy to have the pratfalls of narcissism and being on television than it is to constantly have to worry that at 2:30 a.m. you're going to get a text that you should have gotten and then you're going to fail.
Look, one thing I love now, and this has been the case since I went to Fox in 2016, I work Monday through Friday. And then when I'm not on the air, I'm done. I mean, obviously, I'm keeping track of what's going on around the sports and watching the games and stuff. But I don't have to like worry about getting this call from this agent or making calls myself over the weekend. I still talk to people around the league to have an educated opinion, but it really is like you have full days off where you can be with your family, where you can do what you want to do. So it is much healthier in that respect. I tell people all the time, it's like I've gone from being like in the old newspaper days, a beat writer to a columnist. I'm just doing it on television and radio. So I used to be a beat writer on television when you're an insider. And now I'm like a columnist on television and I can just share my opinion. So now with free agency in the NBA about to heat up, I don't have to chase where Paul George is going, who Philadelphia is going to get. I can just react to it, have a take on it, and then talk about it in that regard, which is much better and much healthier. And I think you probably can't, I don't know if you have more impact, but it's certainly much healthier, at least in my regard.
Well, you can talk more about the stuff fans care about. I think that's where the transaction has gotten a little far afield, where we're just getting so into the information and not the context around which people actually enjoy it. Now, let's talk about beat writing, because that's how you came up. I know Brian Windhorst came up out of Cleveland as well, and I remember him talking about how back in the day, it was a pretty good gig. It didn't have this kind of constant pressure we're talking about of break this news, that you would have your off day, you would call up some GMs in the hotel and you would BS and you would have your game notes column. Is that how you look at it back then? Or did you look at it different, that those were the hard days? Or do you look at it as, man, it was nice?
It was nice. It was nice. And speaking of Windhorst, he was, when I was covering the Cavaliers at the Akron Beacon Journal, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Windhorst was a student at Kent State. I believe that's where, and he was a clerk in our newsroom and for the Akron Beacon Journal. And so I know Brian well, and I'm happy for all his success. He does a great job. But yeah, when you were a beat writer back then, I mean, it was newspapers. There was no internet. And even when the internet was kind of just getting started when I first started beat writing, but it was not a factor at all. And so news broke once a day, or it not that often, but you know what I mean? Like you could only break news in the morning newspaper. And so you didn't have to be constantly all day, every day on guard, worrying about some news breaking about your team. And you had a Peter Vesey from the New York Post who would break national news, but it wasn't like now with Woj and Shams. And so when I was a beat writer in Cleveland or New York, you were competing generally with the other beat writers from the other newspapers on your team, right? I competed at the New York Times against the Daily News and the Post and the Bergen Record and so on. You weren't so much competing against a national writer like Woj or Shams or anyone else who was generally breaking all the news. Again, Vesey would get some scoops, but news was not breaking like it does today. And so if you got a story, like let's say there were times I got a scoop at 6:30 at night or something like that, or even in the afternoon, or maybe it was later in the evening. And you would write it and send it into your desk, the newsroom, but it would not break until the morning paper came out. And you would just hope. You would really just be sitting there hoping, man, I hope the Post doesn't get this or the Daily News doesn't get this. And that was all you could do. But it was much more refreshing. You would, like I said, you didn't have that constant pressure of news being broken on your beat or you having to break news all the time. So it was a lot better, but the internet just changed everything because that eliminated the deadlines, even writing game stories. I would write a story during the game and send it in as soon as the game was over. And then I would have maybe an hour. You'd have till say the game ends at 9:50. You might have until 11:15 or 11 o'clock to get your next story in with quotes and so on and so forth. And once you did that, you were done. But when the internet came around, I remember I was off the beat by then, or when the internet really started becoming the dominant thing. And I was seeing beat writers write until 1 a.m. in the morning and because they had more time and they, could make the story better and get more quotes or whatever. Or even sometimes it was not better, but you just have more time. So you're trying to make it better. And that just adds to the challenge of being a beat writer as well. And now, guys, like when I go to a game, and you may notice this if you follow me on social media, when I watch a game, even now, or when I used to go to games for ESPN and write or the New York Times, whatever, I would not be tweeting. I'm not tweeting during the game. I like to just watch the game and focus on it. But now a lot of guys, particularly beat writers, do feel or they want to tweet during the game. And for me, I just want to watch it, take some notes if I want to, and zero in on the action.
It's funny you say that because in 2018, The Athletic hired me to help with their Warriors coverage. They had a great team with Kawakami there and Anthony Slater and Marcus Thompson. And I came on in and I was used to that by then already at ESPN. I'm tweeting this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, this thought, that thought. And I said to myself, I'm just not going to tweet about the game while the game is happening. And I do think I produced the best work that I produced in my career in that kind of spot. And I realized that there's a creative spend when you're doing that. You might not think much of it. You might think, hey, this is just a little thing I'm throwing out there, or I'm just keeping people, invested in all this. But there's an energy to that. And you're spending the energy versus keeping that energy in. And also not to be so self-regarding about my perspective. I realize, dude, you've been giving away your angle to everybody else when you've been tweeting like an idiot. Right. Now, then I would just keep it to myself. I would keep it under wraps. And lo and behold, when I put it out there the next day, it turned out that it was actually I was the only person saying it, as opposed to in the past where, whoa, somehow a bunch of people are saying the same thing that I said. So it's amazing.
That's a great point.
You get addicted to just being part of the conversation, but it's to the detriment of what you actually are trying to say and how you're trying to differentiate yourself. But what's happening now, Chris, this job we're talking about, the beat writer job, it just seems like it's going away. It seems like it's not even, if it even still is a thing. I think I see some people out there who are good beat writers. I think Dan Wakey is somebody who comes to mind. But even Slater, who is the Warriors beat writer, is covering multiple teams. The dedicated beat writer is being phased out. How do you feel about that? And do you feel it in the coverage we're getting of these NBA teams?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because even as the national guys break the news, right? And even not just transactions, but, they'll break news about things really going on with the team. but the daily beat writers there every day, and you do get something from daily beat writers that you don't get from the national guys, right? Even if it's not news breaking, it's just the information about the team that's at a level that you won't get from the national guys. So I do think it's unfortunate, but I understand it because most people, when they looking for NBA news, they're going to listen to Zach Lowe, or obviously you got the newsbreakers, Woj and Shams, and you got podcasts now and stuff. So there's so much information out there now and available that I do understand the demise of the beat writer. And as you know, even game stories are completely different. And I think I used to actually write a game story kind of about that game, that individual game. That's how I wrote what game stories were. And now there's commentary mixed in, and there's, and it's kind of like a column / game story. And they're good. They're really good to read, but it's completely different from what used to go on back when you just had newspapers and, you had beat writers who were the main voice for that team or about the team.
Well, you lose that authority of the voice of the team, but there's just also so much. And a lot of it, there are guys covering teams, but they're not traveling because of the expense. And that's where you get a lot of the sense of what the team is and who the guys are. Yep. And there are pros and cons because we have a lot more of guys revealing themselves and on social media speaking for themselves and having their own podcasts. And I get probably more of a sense of Paul George's personality now than I would have gotten back in the day. But I do think that we know the teams not as well. We know the teams less than we did. I just get that sense of it. I do think there's a lot of coverage in the 2020 bubble when they had that ratings collapse. And I do think there was a political, social aspect to it. But with any big change, I think there are multiple reasons. I think the most underrated reason, Chris, is that there were no media around. I know people hate to hear that sometimes, is it's easy to lash out at the media, but we understand everything through story. We are just story making and story consuming machines as human beings. And if there's nobody around to really generate, hey, here's what the story is, a lot of times there's just nothing that connects. It can't just be guys out there in uniforms. Somebody's got to tell the story.
I agree completely. And that's why I've said over these past couple of months, the Caitlin Clark stuff is great for the WNBA.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're stories. And now Angel Reese, these are stories. And I know a lot of people that have covered the WNBA for years, some of the former players, they're bothered that all of the talk about the WNBA is centered on Clark or Reese or just these storylines that aren't basketball, right? X's and O's. But I've been saying, this is great for your league. Nobody was watching, that's an overstatement, but the ratings weren't high. The attendance wasn't high. The league was not on most people's radar. And now it is. And as it continues to be that way, people will get more into the basketball because of the storylines. But I agree with you totally. And my partner on radio, Rob Parker, and I, the Odd Couple, we talk about this a lot as far as the players in their podcasts and stuff. And Rob is very bothered by these player podcasts. He doesn't like them because he's always like, there's no pushback. If Paul George if Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce are on their podcast and one of them says something that's kind of out there, in a lot of cases, there's no pushback. The guys will just, laugh about it, whatever. And Rob's like, why don't you need to challenge that guy on what he said. If somebody said Kobe is better than Jordan, don't just laugh it off or, oh, really? Wow. Okay. Challenge them. Why? Why is Kobe better than Jordan? How, and I agree. I understand where he's coming from, but I also say they have their place because as you know, when I was a beat writer or particularly a magazine writer for ESPN the magazine, my goal was to try to get the reader to understand what this athlete is really like. Like, and even in an interview on camera, you're trying to get that guy to be comfortable. You know, like I did some interviews on camera with LeBron, and one of the things I was most proud of with some of them was that it was like he was relaxed and being himself, you know, and that's what you're always trying to do as a reporter, to get that to the reader or the listener or the viewer. And you're getting that from the podcast. You really are seeing what Draymond Green and Paul George and LeBron James and Kevin, all these guys, what they're really like, because they're cursing, they're talking, they're laughing with their other former teammates or whatever it may be, and they're in their setting. And that's what is good for us to see. But you still need the other side of the media that will objectively critique what people are saying or what's going on. And you don't get that from the player podcast for the most part. So you need both.
Yeah, I think you do need both. I think there's a lack of trust from them about how we're going to depict them, because people would always ask me about, oh, is this guy a good guy or a bad guy about Warriors players? And I would say the same thing. I could tell you something about every one of these guys you care about that would make you dislike them or make you like them, right? Because they're human beings, and I've been around them a lot. And there's a lot of gray area. I could tell you a story that makes Steph sound like a snooty rich kid, and I could obviously tell a story that makes him sound like the greatest guy, because he often was that. But it's complicated, and being a superstar is a complicated thing, and they get jaded over time. I'm sure you've seen that. I'm sure you've seen rookies come in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and just the nature of fame and attention. They get a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of short with the temper. It changes over time. And they know that, I think. They know they have those vulnerabilities. I could say that about every player I covered, except for maybe Kevon Looney. I never saw Kevon do anything, never saw him say a bad word to anybody. So he might be a little bit different than some of the others. And I think what they lose in that, when they try to do the whole Players Tribune of we're going to tell our own stories, is that they're not always the best judges of what's interesting to other people, right. Number one. And number two, sometimes people like your flaws. I mean, you want to hide your flaws, but sometimes people like that. I've brought up Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was furious at Sam Smith. I don't think he expected that people would go, oh, I kind of like that. Right. I kind of like that he's ruthless. Right. You know, I always make the analogy to I get some guff, we should say, about this, about that his American Hustle wasn't that good a movie, but they talk about the perfume. I like when they talk about how the perfume always has a little something nasty in it. Right, that's a little bit alluring and a little bit something rotten with a very nice citrus. You know, people are drawn to it, but that's not necessarily something you trust the public to just absorb and put out there in the world. And so I think they almost lose something in the representation of their league when they're trying to sanitize it, but I understand why they want to sanitize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get, you know, we're in the public eye, I'm in the public eye. And one thing you have to have thick skin, and sometimes just avoid stuff. Like, I'm not all on social media looking at my mentions and what people are saying and things like that. One, I'm older and I'm not from the social media generation, but also I don't think that's necessarily healthy. You know, one of the great quotes I've heard is, human beings are not created for excessive criticism or excessive praise. Yeah. Either one can really damage you. And so I do think, and I get it. And you've even seen media members who have, you know, in their careers been very critical of athletes, and that's fine. And then because they're media stars or whatever, when they get criticized by other media or whoever, they get upset. Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute, we expect the athletes to just take it, you know, and you write something critical about them, and then you walk into the locker room and you expect it to be like, yo, what's up, man? Hey, you know, like, they're not going to have any reaction. And that's again, these are things that I think about. And I just try to be fair. And sometimes I can understand why an athlete might be mad. And, you just have to deal with those things. There's a time to critique and be critical of athletes, pundits, people, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I had that experience with Kevin Durant where when he went after me for saying that he was going to leave the Warriors, and he lashed out at me in a press conference and called me out and everything else. And people asked me about that experience and how I felt about him. And it was weird because I felt this sense of empathy. It was strange. I still believed everything I said. Right. And I still felt like he wasn't handling the situation in the right way. And I still feel that way. But when it happened, I suddenly had the uncomfortable scenario of being in the news and turning on ESPN. And I'm watching people debate whether I'm good at my job. And they're debating it out just on television. And I'm rooting for the guy who's defending me. And I'm angry at the guy who's criticizing me. And I'm feeling insane. And I'm going, oh, my God. This is how these dudes live. Yeah. This is how they live. No wonder some of them are crazy. I mean, I would go crazy if this was my existence. And so,
that
affords me nothing. Hey,
and I think, Ethan, that unfortunately, and you remember a few years ago, Kyrie Irving, or actually Adam Silver, said how he was surprised that so many players were unhappy. And then Kyrie Irving agreed with him and said, a lot of guys are unhappy. I think part of it, and I'm not blaming this on the media is what makes these guys larger than life. If it wasn't for the media, television, radio, social media now, writers, reporters, they would just be some guys playing basketball, you know what I mean? And not making the money that they're making. So media is a necessary component of it. We make them larger than life to a certain degree. We have a role in it. But I think that the constant scrutiny does take away some of their ability to enjoy it. And that's why if I was an NBA player or NFL, whatever, I would really not even pay attention to the social media, to the newspapers and things like that. For the most part, I'd have my team that had to let me know something I needed to know. But that can steal your joy. That was a great example of what these guys go through constantly. I've given Kevin Durant some credit. A lot of people think he's kind of weak-minded because he's responding to who knows who, 15-year-olds in their mother's basement on Twitter or whatever. But I've said this. I've been like, look, for him to take in all the social media he does and it not affect his ability on the court, that's pretty impressive that he can do that. Because a lot of guys, it would get in your head what people are saying and the criticism. And I give him credit for that. I do think some of the stuff's just unnecessary for him to do. But that takes a certain level of strength to be able to go out there and hear all the noise and still perform at your best. So, but I do think that it makes it tougher on the players. And social media has been a huge part of that, not just the traditional media.
Well, I think you've got an advantage over some people just by being old enough to not have been raised within it, because I think for a lot of people, it's inconceivable that you would be plugged out of it. And I do wonder if it's a factor. There should be a generation of people coming up as TV stars and media stars, and I almost wonder if it's not happening because that kind of experience might give you rabbit ears to a certain extent. It's a big advantage to be a Charles Barkley and really not care and have a sense of yourself outside of this thing. A lot of other people, they almost feel like who they are and their self-worth, it's really determined by what everybody says on these platforms. And when your self-worth predates social media, I think it can be a big advantage as an opinionist in the public eye.
Yeah, because you're just not caught up in what everybody thinks about your take. You're really just saying what you want to say. I used to think about child actors growing up in Hollywood or even musicians, but like your whole kind of self-worth could be locked up into what others think of you. You might think a song you did is tremendous. And then if nobody likes it, or if your A&R or whatever doesn't like it, now, you have to go back to the drawing board. So a lot of your value is in what other people think about you and say about you. And now it's not just actors and musicians and stuff. A lot of people, just regular people, are growing up constantly concerned and worried about what others think about them. And that's a challenge for humans in general. But now with social media, where you're constantly comparing yourself to others and others are constantly commenting on you, that's challenging. And all the studies that talk about the detriments of social media and the effect that they're having negatively on people's mental health.
Yeah. Well, you seem like somebody who's very grounded, and you have your faith, and that seems to be a tremendous advantage to you. I've been wondering about how to approach this topic, because I have a lot more consideration for religion and faith than I did 10 years ago. I think having kids is part of that. It really makes you vulnerable. It kind of cracks you open. And there's almost this want for things not to be just completely random, to say nothing of just the inspiration of having children. And it just reveals a beauty to life that you didn't really see before. Do you feel like those things are hard to balance, like existing kind of in the public setting, corporate media? I know there was the Harrison Butker situation where his beliefs were very controversial to a lot of people and seemed to be in conflict. Do you think there's any tension to that or anything to balance? I'm not being specific with my question. I apologize for it, but I feel like you've had a lot of thoughts on these issues and could expound and take it in any direction.
Yeah, I do. My priorities in life are God, family, career, like in that order. And again, they're intertwined, but that's how I've always lived my life. And when when you're rooted in that way, a bad day at work, a bad week or year at work doesn't crush you, because you have these other things that are more important to you. And then those things also, though, lead you to work very hard. Like faith in God and trying to provide for your family should lead you to be a hard worker. So it's not that you neglect your career. As far as Harrison Butker, I went on The Odd Couple, and I was interviewed on a few shows, and I talked about, I thought what he said was fine. And people, today is so polarizing that people are on national television or radio, people are blatantly misinterpreting what people are saying when it's right there, when what they actually said is right there and contradicting what you say. So like with Harrison Butker, when he, people took it like he was saying women shouldn't work and women should be at home in the kitchen cooking and making babies or having babies. He didn't say that. He started off by saying, I'm sure many of you young ladies will go on to have great careers. But some of you, more importantly to some of you, will be, your family and raising children. And he talked about how that was what his wife found the most joy in. And so he was not saying women can't work, women shouldn't work, or anything like that. I think what he was saying was that in our society, being a homemaker is viewed as a negative. Yeah. And he was just saying, if that's what you want to do as a woman, then you should be able to do it. And you should understand there's a tremendous value in that. And so that was, an example. There was an example in the Black community on MSNBC. Joy Reid interviewed, I think it was Byron Donald, who's a politician. And he was just talking about how the African-American family was stronger in terms of a nuclear family during the Jim Crow era. Like really from 1880 to 1960, between 80 and 90% of Black children grew up with fathers in the home. And Joy Reid took it like he was saying Jim Crow was the reason that the Black family was so strong. And she interpreted it, I think, or purposely misinterpreted it, as he was saluting and crediting and championing Jim Crow segregation, which he certainly was not. It's just the historical fact that at that time, the Black family structure was much more intact in terms of the nuclear family than it is today. And so those are examples of how people, because of their political views, are willingly and purposely and blatantly misinterpreting what people say so they can support their own political views or make their own argument. So I know I took that a lot of different ways, but lastly, I'll say this. Let me say this lastly about Butker. And this is one thing I've said in various interviews and about Butker. We are a society, we're a pluralistic society. And we have many people with different religions, different faiths, different lifestyles, different viewpoints. And we have to find a way to coexist. And I feel like people who of religious faith, whether it's Christian, Catholic, Islam, Judaism, if they really take that faith seriously and try to live it out and practice it in a lot of ways, which conforms to traditional, what we call traditional values, they are criticized. And it's like people don't want to tolerate them. And I'm saying Harrison Butker has his right to an opinion and his beliefs just like anyone else does, anyone on the left does. And I remember saying, like, so you can't be Catholic now? People wanted him kicked out of the league. I was like, you can't be a Catholic and play in the NFL? Is that really what people want? Or I could take that to, you can't be an Orthodox Jew? You can't be a Muslim? You can't be a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian and play in these leagues? It's ridiculous the ways that some people are going. A lot of people that scream tolerance don't want to tolerate people that disagree or don't applaud their views.
Yeah, that's certainly a hypocrisy. And it's interesting. I mean, you said a lot there, so I'm trying to hit every one of the points. I think there is this weird thing that happens when you mention that one thing was good about the past, you're accused of wanting all of it. And that's absurd. We can say that there was this aspect of the past that was better, but we don't want the past in totality, right? It's like people in 1940 were skinnier than people right now. They were, for whatever reason, the BMI, they were skinnier than people right now. That's better. That doesn't mean that we want to go back to then. And we could go before that. We could go hundreds of years. People were, maybe more fit, and now we've got obesity. I'm not saying that as an endorsement that we can go back. And even, by the way, if I wanted to go back, we couldn't go back. So it's almost a moot point. There are too many technological changes. It's impossible. Camille Paglia, the sort of just interesting feminist but contrarian professor. I mean, she made this point. She said that the way she grew up was in this Italian immigrant community when she was little, and she's very old, and it was just everybody was surrounded by everybody, and the women were with the women and the men were with the men, and everybody was together, and it was amazing. And here's the thing. We can't go back to it. Just too much has happened with the Industrial Revolution and everything else. But we can recognize that we're missing a little something from it too, and maybe seek it out to a degree. And that really resonated with me. Just the feeling of we don't have to want all of the past to recognize that we might be missing some that we were used to back then. And so that's one point that I'm hitting on the Butker thing. I agree. I think it's a little bit complicated, but some of the values that these religions have might not be so tolerant to other people, but as long as the people practicing them aren't being overtly cruel, you kind of have to accept it. We're just not all going to see things the same way. Religion's not going away.
My brother, for a while, about a decade or so, was a Muslim. And so we would constantly debate in good, good, healthy debates about Christianity versus Islam. And we both understood, look, if I behave like I'm supposed to as a Christian and you behave like you're supposed to as a Muslim, we can live in peace. We may disagree, but if I'm treating you like I'm supposed to, like a Christian supposed to treat someone, I'm not going to hate you. I'm not going to, discriminate against you or something in a negative way, and vice versa. And so you're right. Like we do disagree, but we're going to disagree on a lot of things as human beings, but we have to find a way to still respect one another and be civil to one another. And what I always say as a Christian is, if I can work with a person next to a person whose lifestyle I may disagree with, and treat them as a friend and be a friend of them, respect them, and things like that, then they should be able to do the same thing with me or with a Christian or a Muslim or a Jewish person or something like that. So tolerance goes both ways is kind of what I'm really saying.
Yeah, well, it should. It's funny. My main note of criticism for the Butker speech, and he doesn't care. He's got his own perspective. He's speaking at a Catholic college. I'm not Catholic. I didn't like when he brought politics into it. And he could defend that and say that the politics is influencing the abortion issue that he cares about. But I don't know. I didn't like that part of it. I felt if you're trying to make some sort of speech that transcends, now you're bringing us to the muck of politics and the temporal, and maybe people who might otherwise hear you out, they get their backs up about it. I try, at least here, not to formally endorse any politician, because if I'm saying controversial things, I want the broadest amount of people to be able to hear me out. And I feel like that's not going to happen once I wave any particular flag. At that point, people kind of shut off and they go, well, you're from the side I don't want to hear from.
I completely agree 100%. And I've said the same thing to people, like, you won't catch me championing Joe Biden or Donald Trump, because as you said, what you do is you cut off, especially today, in today's society. I do think there are certainly people, leaders, causes that we should get behind. I believe that I would certainly firmly get behind. But for these two, Biden and Trump, well, I'm not impressed by either. There's no way I'm championing one of those guys when I'm trying to, as you said, if I'm really trying to speak about my faith. And I agree, like, you should keep those things out of, when you're trying to speak to people about faith, politics, particularly in this atmosphere and environment where it's so polarizing, can definitely hurt you. And again, I do think that people that may be on the left that agreed with some of the things he said, they won't admit it or, say it because of some of the political things he said as well, and vice versa in another situation.
Yeah, I mean, he's comfortable with what he's saying. I'm sure he doesn't care about my note for him, but I generally appreciate that from anybody trying to say something real and connect, that once you start taking shots at a party, it just becomes a different thing, and it gets heard differently. And again, he doesn't care. He's never going to hear this, I don't think. But that would be my main note of disappointment, even if I don't agree with some of the other things he's saying, because I'm not a traditional Catholic. I don't have that particular perspective. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And it's interesting to me. At the same time, I actually do enjoy when Nick and Colin have political talks. And even if I don't agree with everything that they're saying, I think I enjoy. Here's why I enjoy it, Chris. And I think this is the lesson, because it's compartmentalized. I like that Nick, for the most part, even if he has strong political views, he understands that on a certain podcast that is to be shared. And in your environment on First Things First, that's not the place for it. Is that a rule that you guys came up with together, or is that just something that you all know that, look, we're here to do sports, we're having a different kind of conversation?
No, we haven't talked about it in person. Now, Nick and I have had lunches together where we spoke about certain things that fall into politics or different viewpoints and things like that. And we disagree on some things, but obviously we've been able to remain friends and stuff. And we agree on a lot of things as well, politically and stuff, socially. But on this show, I like you said, it's just, we understand it's a sports show. Now, there have been things like when Reggie Jackson spoke at the game at Wrigley Field. Yeah, we talked about race there. We've talked about race on the show a few times. We spoke about the situation. We were in Kansas City when they had the shooting at the Super Bowl parade. So when the situation calls for it, we definitely will address racial issues or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, we understand it's a sports show. And that's one of the things I'm proud of that we've been able to do on First Things First is we are a show where we talk sports. We clearly have fun. There's humor. It's lighthearted. But our conversations, I do think, have a lot of substance. Certainly when we've addressed race and things like that. But also just even our sports debates, even though we laugh and joke, I do think we provide a lot of substance in our discussions. You know, we have a lot of graphics that we show, statistics and things. So I think we hit a good balance with that.
Yeah, I would say that you guys take sports seriously, but you don't take yourselves too seriously. And that's the good balance, because some of these shows, you get the sense they're not even watching the games or they're just pretending to care. I don't get that sense. I get, you guys care about your takes. You want to be right. And you have a lot of fun with that the next day. You know, somebody's always enjoying maybe wearing the sunglasses as you do when things go well. Somebody's the butt of the joke and really eating it when things don't go so well, as far as the predictions are concerned. But it's a great show, man. I mean, I don't know how you arrived at this sort of chemistry, but it is routinely one of the most enjoyable things on television from my perspective. I want more people who might be snooty, some of my subscribers, again, to just give First Things First a chance on occasion and check it out. I feel like you guys are performing an uncommon trick of having something that feels alive and hilarious on television outside of Inside the NBA, which we only have a year left of.
Right. No, I agree. It's a lot of fun to do. And I think I give Kevin Wildes a lot of credit. I remember when he first was put on the show and they wanted him to bring more levity. This is when the show was still, well, it was 2 weeks before the pandemic. And then all of a sudden it was remote and in boxes. But they wanted him to bring more levity. And I didn't know how that was going to work. I actually was hoping to get that spot and they gave it to him. And then when I was still a guest on the show, and I did notice once he kind of hit his stride, I was like, the show is more fun to be on now. You know, it was always fine to be on, but with him, he brought a lightheartedness in his jokes, and it was more fun to be on. And then I do feel like one of my strengths has been, I feel like I've been able to have chemistry with a lot of people, whether it's on television or radio. I remember when I was on the NBA Countdown with Magic and John Barry and Wilbon, and ESPN was raving about our show. That was in 2011, right during the lockout season. And they were saying, at least they were telling us the ratings were the best they had been on that show. They really loved it. And they were planning to bring it back the next year. And some of the producers were actually looking to move to LA because we were filming it in LA. And then they shifted in another direction and put Bill Simmons and Jalen Rose on it. And so, I feel like I've always kind of been able to develop chemistry with most of my co-hosts, whether it's radio or television. And so, yeah, we all have different roles. Nick, like you said, he's very intelligent. He has the hot takes. Wiles is very humorous. And they call me the elder statesman, or, just that guy that's had the journalism experience and all, seen a lot of things they haven't seen. And I try to bring that. And then humor too, because that's just my natural personality,
Well, my observation, that's all true. But one additional observation about your chemistry with Nick, it's interesting. There's almost a tension from you not mirroring him, where it's funny, this whole chat GPT, it gives you these explanations of how things work. And one of the things was oil and water. I don't know much about chemistry, but I never really thought much about why oil and water didn't mix. And my son asked me about it. So I asked chat GPT, and it's because oil is neutral and water has negative and positive energy in its molecules, and it bonds together like a magnet. And neutral plus positive and negative. I know I'm doing a bad job. Somebody who actually knows chemistry is probably has their head in their hands. But the point is, it doesn't mix because one is neutral and the other is not. That's how I feel about you and Nick, where a lot of the sort of comedic tension and the chemistry is him with big energy trying to almost force you to match his energy, and you're refusing to match his energy, right? The Brock Purdy situation is a good example of this, where Nick is very anti-Purdy and he wants to make you the Brock Purdy guy. I think you're squarely in the consensus of where the media is, and you go, no, I will not go there where you're telling me that I am. I am steadfastly here in the middle. It's so funny, but that almost creates the tension, is your just extreme balance versus his bigger take is this weird. It's just this weird thing that works. It just works really well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And he would love me to be 100, to say Brock Purdy's better than Joe Montana. So he could rip me for it. But no, it does. And then I'll mess with him joking, because I'd say he's moving the goalposts and stuff like that. So it is a lot of fun. You can see Nick get exasperated, whether it's me or sometimes Wilds. But yeah, it definitely works.
It's funny. I'm not afraid of social media and what people out there in the media say about my opinions. I do fear my subscribers. They don't want to hear about Brock Purdy from me. They want NBA media analysis. It's painful for me. I feel like I've got interesting football takes, but that happens sometimes, where if you're a band, people want you to play the hits. They don't necessarily want some of these new songs. You haven't built the credibility to do it. So that's something that I've run into as a Bay Area, football watcher. But what are you going to do?
No, that's true. I mean, you do get pigeonholed into what you talk. And obviously I'm viewed still as an NBA guy, but I've been able to kind of transcend that. And that's something I'm happy with too, that I've been able to, develop some credibility with NFL takes and other sports. And that happened because I was, when I was at ESPN, I would do First Take. And where you're talking about other sports with Skip Bayless and stuff. So that allowed me to share these views, because football has actually always been my favorite sport growing up as a kid. And so you know how it is. And I love basketball. I played basketball, not football, in college. But I just happened, the job that was open for me was to cover the NBA. My first pro sport I covered to some significant degree was baseball. And I wasn't a beat writer, but I was the backup, and I was with the Cleveland Indians throughout their playoff run in 1995 and so on and so forth. But then they just promoted me to the NBA to cover the Cavs. It could have easily been the Browns, and I may have been a football guy. So a lot of that's just kind of the luck of the draw. But I do love both sports, so it's been great.
Yeah, Marcus Thompson told me that he got to be the beat writer covering the Warriors because it was just so low status back then. The newspapers in the Bay Area cover the Giants, cover the Niners. I mean, if you want, we can have you. I guess we need somebody, and that was a great thing for Marcus in the end. How do you feel about you talked about an interesting topic on The Odd Couple about in regards to it's Rickwood Field, is it? Trying to remember, and it was about how baseball is just not as popular with black kids now as back in the day. But as Rob was talking about, as you guys were talking about, it almost seems like it's something that's true for all kids that just happens to be more pronounced with black kids, but it's all kids. It just, baseball almost seems like it's losing out due to a natural consequence as being outcompeted by these other sports. As somebody who grew up playing baseball, how do you feel about it? Is it just something in this modern world that really can't compete going forward? Or am I, overreacting?
I think you make a great point. And when you use the term modern world, like when I grew up, baseball, I viewed baseball just like I viewed football and basketball. I played it. I went from one sport to the other playing it. All my black friends were playing it in Little League and everything. I was in a majority black Little League in certain places where I lived. And I think that, I think the sport, I think a few things. Football, and when I was a kid, football was not king. It was popular and stuff, but baseball was tops, and then football was somewhere behind it. I think what propelled football to its current status is fantasy football. I think the gambling, I think the interest in, having your own team and following it, that was in like the 90s. And I think that's when football really just skyrocketed and left every other sport behind. So I think that's one of the things that propelled football. I think basketball, David Stern did a tremendous job of marketing individuals rather than the teams. And there might be some negatives to that, but every team, when you think of the NBA, every team's got like somebody you want to see, because of their game or, they're like a marquee name. And I think and then the sport itself lends itself to showing off the athlete's creativity and athletic ability and things like that. Baseball as a sport, it's a slower sport, and it doesn't lend itself as much to showing off the athleticism like basketball. You just can't be as creative in baseball as you can be in basketball, dunking a basketball, dribbling between your legs, all of that, behind the back passes. It's just the nature of the sport. But I think because it's so slow, and you can literally watch a baseball game and not see much action for a long time, I think that's hurt the sport. And as our society has become a faster, more I need it now society, and our attention spans are shorter, I do think that's hurt baseball. I used to, as a kid, watch baseball on TV and really just watch a game. But now everything's so much faster that you almost get conditioned to needing immediate action. And I do think that that's hurt baseball. And it's almost becoming, I hate to even say this, but it feels like it's almost becoming a niche sport, where you got that group that likes it and plays it, but it's not almost like hockey to some degree, or soccer. So, and the numbers show that the next generation, as you said, is not playing it like it used to.
Yeah. And what's weird about it, though, is that about as many people watch the World Series as watch the NBA Finals. But for whatever reason, nationally, you can have a debate show and you're talking basketball and people will follow along, and it's part of that conversation. But when Nick starts talking about following the Royals, and it might be at the end of one of your episodes, it's almost like when he says he's going to Vegas to play poker. It's just not, it's not part of this whole thing. And I don't completely understand why that is, or what that is, how baseball can be roughly as popular as a viewing experience as the NBA, but maybe 1% of the sports talk conversation. But that's what the market says. People don't really want national baseball talk.
When I first started doing First Take on ESPN with Skip, I remember it was like October. So the baseball playoffs were going on. And I don't know if it was a World Series or just the playoffs. And we were talking NFL football and basketball. We may have done one topic on baseball. And I'm sitting here like, this is the World Series, or these are the championship series. How are we not talking baseball? We're talking more about week 4 of the NFL. And then they explained that, like you said, the surveys were showing in the study groups that they did with people, when you start talking baseball, the ratings plummeted. Wow. And it's the same on national radio. Our show, The Odd Couple, talks more baseball. We don't talk a lot, but we talk more than most national shows. Locally, it's still very talked about. But nationally, it really is not on the radar. Even on First Things First, we have our weird, wilds, weird, and wonderful. And that's where we get our baseball highlights in. But we did not talk hardly any World Series stuff, which is incredible. And I think as far as the ratings, obviously you're right about the World Series, the NBA Finals. I'll be honest, and I think, again, it's some of the change in our society. I think the reason that the playoffs and World Series do better in baseball than maybe the regular season, it's the stakes. Like, I love still watching playoff baseball. Like, I will be glued to the TV watching playoff baseball. But when you play 162 games, why am I going to watch a Tuesday night game in July that's game 78 of 100? I actually think the NBA, I wouldn't mind, as much as I love basketball, if they cut it to maybe 60, 65 games. Baseball, and I know they won't do it because they can make money with more games. But if baseball cut it to 100 games, I think the popularity would, and the urgency would be more there in the fan base.
Well, I think you also just need more of a correlation between how good a team is and its playoff success. That's my belief. Some people would disagree, but I don't like this stuff where the worst team has as good a chance as the best team when we go into the postseason. That makes me feel like it's not real. I'm trying to.
See, I think that's the nature of the sport. I think, like baseball, it's a sport of failure. Like, if you fail 70% of the time to get a base hit, you're a Hall of Famer because you batted 300. And I just know this from having played baseball, and then just obviously watching the game. The greatest players go in slumps, batting slumps, and pitchers. So if a top player goes into a slump, or players during the playoffs, that's the wrong time. Or if pitchers get hot, or a great pitching staff can dominate a game or a series. And that is why I totally agree with you. The best team probably rarely wins the World Series, because how many times just during the regular season do you see a superior team go play an inferior team, like a last place team, and lose the season, that series? They might win 1 out of 3 against it. It happens because of the nature of the sport. Look, the best way, you remember this back in the day, they used to just have the pennant, and the winner of the American League, or the best record in the American League, played the best record in the National League in the World Series. That's how you could determine the best team. But I don't want to go back to that, because the playoffs are fun and exciting. But you're right. The best team doesn't. The Dodgers have been great for more than a decade, and they got 1 World Series.
Yeah, like a little kind of bubble World Series, like the bubble NBA Finals.
Right,
they got.
It was. And I don't know how you fix it. I agree, other than to go back to the way it used to be, which none of us wants.
Yeah, maybe just fewer teams. But then I'm asking for a weird thing. I talked about with Chuck Klosterman, about how I need to be tricked into thinking the best team won. And when you include too many teams and a 500 team wins the World Series, then I can't be deceived anymore. And that's a problem. To what you were saying, Ohtani's exciting, but what's really intriguing to me is this Royce Lewis guy, not just because he's hitting a home run every other game, but he had an offer, and then the next game he was great again. And he said to the media, I don't do that slump thing. That's intriguing to me. And they look through the numbers.
I think he'll learn, but it sounds great. It sounds great.
I mean, they went through the numbers, and apparently, for whatever reason, he is not slumped. That's not something he does. He's never too high or never too low. But hey, you give me a baseball player who's slump proof, that might be exactly what we need to get back into this sport. And I agree with you that Royce Lewis is going to learn. But
I think Ohtani. And I hope he goes back to pitching, but he is, and obviously he's not American. There can be language barriers, even though he speaks English, but he's someone I think who could really reinvigorate the sport. I do like the rules changes where now there's more base stealing again, manufacturing of runs, and even a little more bunting and stuff like that. Because analytics had turned it into home runs and strikeouts, and so I also think that baseball, I almost think they should make a rule. I'm not saying this hard and fast, but maybe a rule if you limited it to say each team to 4 pitchers a game or something, because I think the analytics, and this happens in all the sports, but the analytics are making. I'm sure that analytics, and I know some teams have tried this in a small sample size, but the analytics probably say a different pitcher every inning or two would be best. That guy can just go in there and throw 100 and you know what I mean? And the team never sees him a second time in the lineup. But that wouldn't be best for the sport because you need stars. We need star pitchers. Yes. And I think that's where the sports need to find that fine line and balance with analytics. Because the shift was a prime example. The shift was great strategically, but it hurt the sport.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I hated it. I hated that feeling of I just watched the guy hit it 100 miles an hour up the middle, and I don't know if that's a hit anymore. I didn't like the feeling of when something that would have been a hit my whole life, all of a sudden it wasn't. And it's smart. And I think that it gets conflated. Sometimes when analytics are criticized, people think the use of it is being called into question in terms of its effectiveness. And that's not what we're talking about right here. We're talking about the opposite. We're almost talking about it's too effective and it breaks the game. I was always like that when I would play video games with my friends. I would try to find the glitch in Madden. And I like doing that and being a jerk in that way. But that's not a fun Madden game to watch. And my friend would throw the controller. And it's not cool. And so if you're running a sport, part of your job is to play defense against the analytics in a way, or to make sure that it's not breaking the game and turning it into something aesthetically that doesn't work for people. And you're right. They have discovered that maybe you're more effective if you're pumping 100 miles an hour pitcher after pitcher and not subjecting a starter to weathering the storm of an outing. But that's not what we want. We want a true battle.
I hate when a guy's got a no-hitter through 7 and they're taking him out. I'm like, I mean, first of all, for that player, that is something, that's what you shoot for. You want to throw a no-hitter. But for the fans, those are the types of things that I do think, hurt baseball, is that you're taking away those stories. And I'll tell you what, the NBA has to be careful too.
Yep.
Because the 3-pointer, which we saw Boston ride the 3-point shot to the championship, I feel like, I don't know if it's a fact, but I feel like there's a threshold. They almost shot half their shots from 3 during the regular season. I bet you next year they do shoot half their shots, if not a little more, from 3. And it's just going to get more and more. And I feel like there's a threshold where if too many of the shots become threes, it will break the game. Now, I might be wrong, but I saw it with the All-Star game. That, to me, that's what ruined the All-Star game. But I think they need to watch closely the NBA and consider, if it gets to a point where it's hurting the game, maybe you take away that side three, the corner three,
the corner,
and you just have an arc. It's a 3-point arc. So you'd still have the 3-pointer, but it would bring back the mid-range game and post play, because you couldn't just stack 5 guys or 4 guys around the perimeter, the 3-point line. So it's just something I think the league needs to watch, because I don't think you want a game being determined by which team was hot from 3 and which team wasn't. It's always a make or miss league, but I just don't think you want it boiled. I think sports are better with balance. I don't want 3 yards in a cloud of dust in the NFL, and I don't want the arena league where it's all passing. I want a mix. I don't want all threes and dunks in basketball. I want some fast breaks, some post plays, some threes, mid-range. And we talked about baseball. I don't want all homers and strikeouts. I want manufactured runs, base hits, stolen bases, bunts, complete games pitched, things like that. And the funny thing is, Ethan, this is in all the sports. I don't know about football, but basketball and baseball, the players are injured now, it feels like, more than ever. Yeah. Even though in the pitch count, they're not throwing half as much as they used to. And basketball, I mean, they got all these trainers, nutrition, the equipment is better, and yet guys can't play 80 games in a season.
I mean, that one is a tricky one. I'm not sure how to answer that particular question of why it's still happening, but I completely agree with you on how sports have a platonic ideal. I think the platonic ideal for a regular season game, probably around 110 points for each team on average. For a playoff game, about 100. A little bit ugly, a little bit gritty, not loosey-goosey. Things feel hard. I think we want that. And I think all these sports have that, where I don't think football's football if it's 120 to 107. I don't think it's just that people want more offense. Right. No, there's a balance to it. I think they were under this misapprehension, and the NBA was that, well, our ratings went down in the early 2000s when these playoff games were 75 to 72. That doesn't mean we want it completely the other way either.
Right.
We want it somewhere in between. And so I think it's your job when you're running a sport to somehow produce those results that give people a balanced product. Chris, this has been fantastic. Your show, all of your shows represent the platonic ideal in sports talk entertainment. Is there anything you'd want to plug for us? Not that you would need to, considering that you are ubiquitous out here. Something we should check out.
No, just look for me with the Odd Couple on 7 to 10 Eastern every night, Monday through Friday on Fox Sports Radio, the iHeartRadio app, Sirius XM 83, and then of course, First Things First. We are. I feel like I guess I'll text you. There's a little scoop, but I don't want to say it. I can't say it. But check out First Things First, 3 to 4:30 Eastern on FS1. And like you said, the show's going great. We're having fun. As you know, we've been doing little mini sitcoms.
Oh, I've seen them.
So we're having fun.
Yeah, the social media is great. Well, if Nick calls you a Brock Purdy homer, tell him you are squarely balanced. If he wants to talk to a Brock Purdy homer, I'm right here. I will actually, with my chest, say he's better than some of these quarterbacks people call elite, but that's neither here nor there. Chris, this has been great. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, Ethan. Enjoyed it, man.